He didn't say goodbye. One day he was there, struggling but present. And the next, he was gone. Phone off. Apartment empty. Like he'd never existed at all. This is the story of why some American men vanish when life gets hard, and the psychology behind the disappearance no one talks about. Marcus was 32 when his world started falling apart. Lost his job. Construction industry hit hard by the recession. Savings disappeared fast. Couldn't pay rent. Couldn't provide for his girlfriend and their daughter. Couldn't be the man he'd promised to be. And so, one Tuesday morning in 2009, he packed a bag and left. No note. No explanation. Just gone. If you've ever watched someone disappear or felt the pull to vanish yourself when everything fell apart, hit subscribe. Drop a like. Comment below. Your engagement helps YouTube show this to others who need to understand. Now let's go deeper. The vanishing man is an American phenomenon that no one wants to examine too closely. We see it everywhere. Fathers who walk out. Partners who ghost when things get difficult. Men who simply erase themselves from their own lives when the pressure becomes too much. And the common narrative is simple. They're cowards. Selfish. Weak. They abandoned their responsibilities. They chose the easy way out. But that narrative, while emotionally satisfying, misses something crucial about why this happens. About what's really driving these men into the shadows. Because disappearing isn't easy. It's devastating. It's a form of psychological suicide where the man kills his own identity, his relationships, his entire life, rather than face something that feels more unbearable than loss. Failure witnessed. American culture has a particular way of defining masculinity. You are what you provide, what you achieve, what you build. A real man takes care of his family, solves problems, never breaks, never admits he can't handle it. These aren't just ideals. They're psychological commandments that get embedded in boys from the moment they're told to toughen up, to man up, to be strong. And when a man internalizes these messages deeply enough, his entire sense of self becomes tied to his ability to fulfill them. He's not a person with value beyond his function. He is his function. Provider, protector, problem solver. Psychologist Terry Real calls this the masculine code, a set of rules about what men are allowed to be, to feel, to express. And one of the strictest rules is this: never let them see you fail. For men operating under this code, struggling isn't just difficult, it's existentially threatening. Because if you can't provide, if you can't fix things, if you can't be strong, then what are you? Who are you? The answer, for many men, feels like nothing. Like a fraud who's been found out. Like someone who doesn't deserve to take up space. Marcus grew up in Detroit, working-class neighborhood. His father worked in the auto plants, provided for the family through 2 recessions, and never complained. Never showed weakness. Just showed up and did what needed to be done. That was the model. That was what it meant to be a man. So when Marcus lost his job, when the construction sites dried up, when he couldn't make rent, it wasn't just a financial crisis. It was an identity crisis. Because everything he'd built his sense of self on was crumbling. His girlfriend, Sarah, tried to be supportive. Told him they'd figure it out together. That it wasn't his fault. That she loved him regardless of his job situation. But Marcus couldn't hear it. Because in his mind, her love was conditional on his ability to provide. Not because she'd said that, but because that's what he'd learned love required. Performance, function, success. And now that he was failing, the love couldn't be real. She must be disappointed, must be staying out of obligation, must be secretly resenting him for not being the man she deserved. Researchers studying male psychology in crisis have identified something called fragile masculinity. It's not about men being weak. It's about masculine identity being so narrowly defined that any threat to that definition feels like a threat to existence itself. When your worth is tied entirely to external achievement, losing that achievement means losing yourself. And the shame of that loss becomes unbearable. But here's what makes the vanishing particularly tragic. The shame doesn't drive men to seek help. It drives them to hide. Because admitting you need help violates the masculine code just as much as failing does. Real men don't ask for help. Real men figure it out. Real men suffer in silence. So Marcus did what many men do in this situation. He isolated. Stopped talking to friends. Stopped being honest with Sarah. Put on a mask that everything was fine while internally he was drowning. This is what psychologists call avoidant coping. When the problem feels unsolvable, you avoid it. You pretend it doesn't exist. You distance yourself from everything that reminds you of your failure. And day by day, you start disappearing before you actually leave. Sarah noticed the change. The distance. The silence. The way Marcus would stare at nothing, lost in his own head. She'd ask what was wrong, and he'd say nothing. Everything's fine. I've got it under control. But he didn't. And she knew it. But she didn't know how to reach him. Because he'd built a wall between them made of shame and masculine pride that she couldn't penetrate. This is the pre-vanishing phase. The slow death that happens before the physical disappearance. The man is still there, but he's not present. He's a ghost haunting his own life, waiting for the moment when the distance becomes physical. For Marcus, that moment came after a job interview that seemed promising. He made it to the final round. Thought maybe this was it. The thing that would fix everything. Let him be a man again. He didn't get it. They went with someone else. Someone younger. Someone cheaper. Didn't matter why. What mattered is he'd failed again. And that night, lying in bed next to Sarah, their daughter sleeping in the next room, Marcus made a decision. Not consciously, perhaps, but viscerally, emotionally, from the place where shame lives. He couldn't fix this. He couldn't be what they needed. And watching them watch him fail was more painful than anything he'd ever felt. So he would spare them, spare himself. He would leave, not because he didn't love them, but because he loved them too much to let them keep seeing him like this. Broken, useless, not a man. This is the logic of the vanishing. Distorted, tragic, but psychologically coherent to the man experiencing it. He genuinely believes he's doing something selfless, removing the burden of his failure from their lives. What he can't see, because shame has blinded him, is that his absence will hurt far more than his presence ever could. That his daughter will grow up with abandonment issues. That Sarah will blame herself for not being enough to make him stay. That the wound he's creating will last generations. But in that moment, consumed by shame and drowning in the masculine code that says he's worthless if he can't provide, leaving feels like the only option. So he left, took only what fit in a backpack, left his phone on the kitchen counter, didn't leave a note because what could he possibly say that would make this okay? He just vanished. This pattern, this psychological dynamic, is playing out across America, in different circumstances, but with the same underlying mechanics. Men who lose jobs and can't handle being unemployed. Men who face financial ruin and can't bear to be seen as failures. Men who develop health problems and feel diminished by their inability to be strong. Men who struggle with addiction and disappear rather than get help. Men who face legal troubles and run rather than face the consequences. Different circumstances. Same shame. Same inability to be vulnerable. Same toxic belief that their worth is tied entirely to their function and performance. Research on male suicide and disappearance shows alarming patterns. Men are 3 to 4 times more likely to complete suicide than women. And a significant number of missing persons cases involve men in their 30s and 40s facing financial or personal crises. The connection is clear. When men feel they've failed at masculinity, they often choose erasure over exposure. Death, whether literal or social, over the humiliation of being seen as less than a man. This is what the masculine code costs. Not just individual men, but families, communities, entire generations shaped by absent fathers who couldn't handle being human. But here's what makes this even more complex. The vanishing isn't always permanent. Sometimes men come back, years later, after they've rebuilt something, after the shame has dulled enough to face what they left behind. Marcus came back after 3 years. He'd been living in Montana, working odd jobs, staying off the grid. trying to become someone who could face himself again. He'd hit bottom in ways he never imagined. Homeless for months, nearly froze to death one winter, thought seriously about ending it more than once. But something kept him alive. Some part of him that knew, despite everything, that he wasn't actually worthless, that his daughter deserved to know him. That running hadn't solved anything. It had just postponed the reckoning. So he came back, terrified, ashamed, expecting nothing but justified anger and rejection. Sarah was remarried, had moved on, built a life without him, and she was angry. Years of anger that she'd had to process alone. Years of explaining to their daughter why Daddy left, why he didn't love them enough to stay. But she also understood something now that she didn't then. That Marcus hadn't left because he didn't love them. He'd left because he didn't love himself. Because he'd been so broken by shame and toxic masculinity that disappearing felt like his only option. Understanding didn't erase the pain, didn't undo the damage, but it created space for a different kind of conversation. One where Marcus could finally be honest, could finally admit he'd been drowning, could finally say, "I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't know how to be weak. I didn't know how to be human." This is the confession at the heart of male vanishing. The thing men can't say until after they've destroyed everything. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I didn't know my worth wasn't tied to my productivity. I didn't know love could survive my failure. And the tragedy is, most of the time, love could have survived. Relationships could have weathered the storm. Families could have adapted. But the man never gave them the chance. Because the masculine code said that admitting struggle was worse than disappearing. Psychologist Brené Brown has done extensive research on shame and vulnerability. What she's found is that shame thrives in silence and secrecy. That the antidote to shame isn't success. It's connection. It's being seen in your struggle and loved anyway. But for men raised in cultures of toxic masculinity, that kind of vulnerability feels impossible, dangerous, like a betrayal of everything they were taught about what it means to be a man. So they choose isolation over intimacy, disappearance over honesty, and everyone loses. Marcus's daughter, Amber, was 5 when he left, 8 when he came back. The reunion was complicated. She didn't remember him clearly, wasn't sure how to feel about this stranger claiming to be her father. Sarah allowed supervised visits, slowly, carefully, because Amber's well-being mattered more than Marcus's redemption. He'd lost the right to be father when he left. Now he had to earn it back. And Marcus did something he'd never done before in his life. He went to therapy, started dealing with the shame, the toxic beliefs, the masculine code that had nearly killed him. He learned things that seemed obvious in hindsight, but were revolutionary to him. That asking for help is strength, not weakness. That vulnerability is courage, not failure. That his worth as a human being wasn't tied to his job or his ability to provide. He learned that real manhood isn't about never struggling. It's about how you handle struggle, not by hiding or running, but by being honest, by letting people help, by staying even when it's hard. These lessons came too late to save his relationship with Sarah. Too late to undo the years Amber spent wondering why she wasn't enough to make Daddy stay. But they weren't too late to change his future, to break the pattern, to ensure he never vanished again. This is the hopeful part of this story. That men can unlearn toxic masculinity, can develop healthier ways of being, can learn to handle failure without shame, can learn to be vulnerable without feeling diminished. But it requires work. Deep, uncomfortable work. Work that challenges everything they were taught about what it means to be a man. And here's the critical piece. This work can't happen after the vanishing. It needs to happen before, in the early signs, when the shame starts building, when the isolation begins, when the mask starts cracking. That's when intervention matters. When friends, partners, family need to push past the "I'm fine" and say, "I see you struggling, and I'm not going anywhere." But that's also where American culture often fails men, because we don't create spaces for male vulnerability. We don't teach boys emotional literacy. We don't give men permission to struggle without judgment. Instead, we tell them to toughen up, be strong, figure it out. And then we act surprised when they internalize those messages so deeply that they'd rather disappear than admit they can't. Organizations working with men's mental health have found that the most effective interventions involve peer support. Men helping men, creating spaces where vulnerability isn't weakness but shared humanity. When men realize they're not alone in their struggle, when they see other men being honest about their failures and fears, something shifts. The shame loses its power. The isolation breaks. The masculine code that said they had to be perfect reveals itself as the lie it always was. Marcus now volunteers with a men's group, helps other men who are where he was, standing on the edge of vanishing, convinced they have no other option. He tells them his story, not to inspire, but to warn, to say, disappearing doesn't solve anything. It just spreads the pain, multiplies the damage, creates wounds that last lifetimes. He tells them what he wishes someone had told him. That failing at your job doesn't make you a failure. That losing your money doesn't make you worthless. That needing help doesn't make you less of a man. He tells them the truth that could have saved his family. That the people who love you want you present. Not perfect, present. Struggling and human and real. Not gone. Some men hear it. Some start therapy. Start being honest. Start asking for help. And they survive their crisis without vanishing. Others can't hear it yet. The shame is too deep. The masculine code too embedded. And they disappear anyway. Into the night. Into addiction. Into homelessness. Sometimes into death. And Marcus grieves for them. Because he knows what they're feeling. Knows the unbearable weight of shame. Knows how disappearing can feel like the only kindness you have left to offer the people you love. But he also knows the truth they can't see. That their absence will haunt the people they leave behind in ways their presence never would have. That years from now, their children will have abandonment issues. Their partners will have trust issues. Their families will have holes that can never be filled. The vanishing doesn't end suffering. It just redistributes it, takes it out of the man and plants it in everyone who loved him. This is what we need to talk about when we talk about men vanishing. Not just the act, but what drives it. The toxic masculinity that says men are only valuable for what they provide. The shame that makes failure feel like death. The isolation that convinces men they're better off gone than struggling in front of the people they love. And we need to talk about solutions. Not after men vanish, but before. In how we raise boys. In what we teach them about masculinity. In how we create space for men to be vulnerable without judgment. We need to tell boys that their worth isn't tied to their performance. That asking for help is smart, not weak. That failure is part of being human, not proof of being worthless. We need to create communities where men can struggle openly, where they can admit they're drowning without losing respect, where vulnerability is normalized rather than punished. And we need to challenge the masculine code wherever we see it. When someone tells a boy to man up, when someone mocks a man for crying, when someone suggests that real men don't need help. Because every time we reinforce those toxic messages, we're adding weight to the shame that drives men to vanish. We're making it a little more likely that when crisis comes, he'll choose disappearance over honesty. Marcus's relationship with his daughter is still complicated. She's 17 now, still processing the abandonment, still working through the damage in therapy. Some days she's angry. Some days she's sad. Some days she's just confused about how to feel about a father who left and came back, but can never undo what he did. Marcus accepts all of it, doesn't defend himself, doesn't make excuses, just shows up, consistently, imperfectly, human. He can't fix what he broke, but he can be present now, can be the father he should have been then, can model for her what healthy masculinity looks like. Not perfection, but presence, honesty, vulnerability. That's all any of us can do. Show up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because disappearing doesn't protect anyone. It just creates different, deeper wounds. The men who vanish aren't monsters. They're casualties of a culture that taught them their humanity was conditional on their success, that their value was tied to their function, that vulnerability was weakness and weakness was unacceptable. They're victims of toxic masculinity, and so are the families they leave behind. Breaking this cycle requires changing the culture, changing how we define masculinity, changing what we teach boys about strength and weakness, changing what we expect from men in crisis. It requires all of us, men and women, parents and partners, communities and culture at large, because the vanishing will continue until we make it safe for men to stay, to struggle, to ask for help, to be human, until we tell them, clearly and consistently, that their worth isn't tied to their productivity, that failure doesn't make them worthless, that we want them present, not perfect, present. That simple message, if internalized deeply enough, could save lives, could save families, could prevent the next Marcus from packing a bag and disappearing into the night. So here's my question, and I genuinely want to hear from you. If you've known someone who vanished, or if you felt the pull to disappear yourself, what do you wish had been different? What could have helped? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm truly curious. And if this resonated, hit subscribe. Leave a like. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your engagement helps YouTube show this to others who might be struggling. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. You matter more than you know.